The Sicilian defense is one of the oldest but also most used opening in chess, as it generally creates dynamic and approximately equal positions. That's why aggressive players like Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, and nowadays Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, Nepomniachtchi and Fabiano Caruana played it a lot. As in any other opening, there are different ways to play this opening from black. I'm going to showcase 5 of best of them in accordance with modern theory and my personal opinion. Okay, this is FIDE Master Viktor Neustroyev and 5 best variations in Sicilian defense. Najdorf Variation, probably the most famous variation. Bobby Fischer used it as his main weapon with black in the past. Some years later, the most dynamic chess champion in chess, Garry Kasparov, also including this opening in his repertoire. And today even Magnus Carlsen has tried to play this aggressive line. I'm going to show just a few basic things that you should remember about Najdorf. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3 and a6 in this position to prevent knight b5 or bishop to b5. Bishop e2 is one of the classical moves in this position, not the main one. Some people prefer playing bishop c4. Then what else can be played? Bishop e3, f3, f4, rook g1, h3, or even knight b3. And of course, we shouldn't forget about bishop g5, which I believe is the most popular line. However, let me explain the classical variation, bishop e2, then e5. This is the main idea of the line. Knight goes to b3, bishop e7. Yes, here black has some weaknesses on their light squares, especially on d5, but they are trying to compensate it with their piece's activity and the bishop on e6. f4. If f4 with the idea to fight for the center, then black can apply a typical idea, which is quite common not only for Najdorf. E takes f4, bishop takes f4 and knight c6, and later this knight comes to e5. As for the d5 square, and if white somehow decides to occupy it, then black can capture on d5 with their bishop and change the pawn structure. Now, Dragon Variation, one of the most entertaining variations to play in Sicilian. However, it requires enormous theoretical knowledge. There are a lot of sublines, go up to more than 20 moves. Oh, that also illustrates how much this variation has been studied. So the idea of this variation is to fianchetto a dark squared bishop. I'll show you. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3 and g6. So the dark squared bishop is one of the strongest pieces in this position and should control this diagonal and especially put the pressure on d4. Bishop e3, for example, not the only move, but one of the most common, and this is what I play with white pieces against dragon. They can also play bishop e2, for example. f3 can be played immediately. Bishop e3 starts Yugoslav attack. The idea of such a move is to castle queenside for white. Bishop g7, f3. Here, with f3, they avoid knight g4, attacking the bishop, and also would like to play g4, h4, h5. So this move supports the pawn march. Knight c6, queen d2, castle, and in this position white typically plays 3 moves. Bishop c4, probably the most popular, castle queenside, and g4. I prefer g4, but bishop c4 is more common. They just control the d5. And bishop d7, castle queenside, and rook c8, with the intention of playing knight a5, knight c4, and also initiating a pawn march on the queen side to attack the king. While white is going to attack on the king side with g4, h4, h5, with the idea to open the files and join the rooks to the attack. This opening is quite sharp,
especially if white plays Yugoslav attack. Now, Sveshnikov Variation. Popular recently, and Sveshnikov Variation is the most dynamic variation, I would say. Black moves many pawns, attacking the opponent pieces, getting activity, but at the same time they weaken their position. This opening became more popular when Magnus Carlsen used it against Fabiano Caruana in the World Chess Championship match. However, since 90s, I often meet this opening in club players and even among strong title players. e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and e5. Now, this move could be considered a mistake because the d5 square becomes weak, but because of a good dynamic that black has after that, now it's proven that this move is still good and offers playable position for black. Knight db5. d6 to cover the d6 square. Then knight d5 was played by in the game between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. Bishop g5 is more common. a6, knight goes to a3. b5 has to be played, otherwise the knight comes to c4 and joins the game. Then e3, and they control the d5 square with two knights, which is quite dangerous for black. So it's quite important to remember the move order. b5. In this position, I as white capture on f6 and then occupy the d5 square with my knight. But most players prefer to play knight d5 first, and after bishop e7 they capture on f6. So the bishop comes to f6. Then which plan to follow? c3, another line is c4, but c4, b4, knight has to go to c2. b4 is not actually hanging. Sometimes black needs to protect it, sometimes not. Depends on the concrete variation. So c3, bishop g5 is the most popular move, and knight e7 is another possible move, rook b8. No, bishop g5 is considered the most popular and maybe the most strong for black, with the idea to castle and play f5. Black tries to activate their bishop because if they locate it on e7, the bishop will be restricted with the pawn cover. So black gave up the center but tries to undermine it with f5 and then initiate a kingside attack. The next line is Scheveningen Variation. This is a really solid opening and maybe the most solid opening within Sicilian defense. Often it leads to hedgehog pawn structure when black locates their pawns on e6 and d6, so here and here, and keeps them flexible to protect the center from any white attack in the center. Of course, black gives up the space, but at the same time creates a solid barrier. I'll show you. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and e6. It's actually similar to many variations. The pawns are flexible. What white can do in this position? They have a lot of options. Bishop e3, this is what I would play. Bishop e2 is classical variation. f4, bishop g5, and maybe the most critical move is g4, carries attack. After g4, h6, or maybe knight c6 or a6, there are a lot of moves, but I would prefer playing this position for white, of course. However, it's still a solid opening. So let me show bishop e2. Bishop e7, castle, castle, then f4, fighting for the e5 square, a6, to secure the c7 square for the queen. Knight c6 can be played as well. a6, bishop a3, knight c6, a4 and queen c7. So we came to the standard Scheveningen middle game position. White has more space, but black pieces are flexible. The only black's task is to develop the bishop. Usually it can be done with knight d4, e takes d4 and d5. The other thing that black can do, and actually an older strategy, is bishop d7, take on d4 and activate the bishop. And the last line I would like to demonstrate is Can variation. This opening is characterized by playing a6 earlier. I'll show you. So this is a flexible variation and actually my favorite one. e4, c5, knight f3, e6, so we fight for the d5 square here instead of playing d6 and fighting for e5. Then d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and this is where we play a6 with the intention to prevent knight b5 activity to get our queen to e4, c7. Why to c7? Because from c7 we control the e5 square, which we can't control when we play e6. Well, c4 is okay. In this position, knight f6, knight c3, queen c7. And if a3, we can transform to the hedgehog. Usually knight c3 is played, queen c7 to prevent e5, bishop d3 or bishop e2, knight f6, castle, and in this position we have a lot of moves. For example, knight c6 is playable, however I recommend you playing d6, relocating the knight to d7 and then to c5. This is a complicated position that you should definitely remember, and the main thing is to understand what moves made by white can be used as mistakes or maybe inaccuracies to be able to adjust for their strategy. So if the bishop comes to d3, one of the best way to fight against it is to play knight d7 and knight c5. When the bishop is on e2, you'd better locate the knight on c6 or play b5 early to fight for the e4 pawn, then b5, b4. So for example, here d6, let's say queen e2, knight bd7, king h1, bishop e7, f4, then castle, and after they play bishop d2 or something like that, then knight c5, we can take this light squared bishop, and this is how we prevent white's attack on h7. This is what you actually can learn from my course devoted to Sicilian. The position can be quite sharp, it depends on the line. But if only white makes a mistake, black is ready to overtake the initiative.
These are my favorite variations of Sicilian defense. I hope you like them and can try some in your future games. Thanks for watching, and make sure you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel and share it with your friends chess players. If you would like to suggest any other interesting variation within Sicilian defense, please feel free to share it into the comment section below this video. The Sicilian defense is undoubtedly one of the most aggressive openings in chess. If you like to play a complicated game full of tactics and attacks, then this opening and these variations are for you. However, if you're passionate about chess and would like to learn which openings are popular among grandmasters nowadays, watch the video on the screen next about top 5 modern chess openings. Okay, enjoy this video and I'll see you there in a moment.